Hi, and welcome to Tech Talk, where we take a look at what's going on in technology news and offer some insights, hopefully pithy ones. I'm Ken Mingus, Executive Editor at Computer World. I'm here with J.R. Raphael, our Android blogger at Computer World. We're going to take a look at Android fragmentation, operating system upgrades, what's going on, what's going right, what's going wrong. So stick around. Okay, so JR, thanks a lot for being here from your undisclosed location in the middle of the country. Every year,
as always.
Yes, as always. Thank you. Every year, you take a look at one of the issues that Android seems to have, which is the slow pace of operating system upgrades. And you've recently done your extremely comprehensive 4,000-word report card. I know that because I edited the 4,000 words. No, it's really important that we explain what's going on here. So, with that little bit of context, what did you find with this year's report card? Where do things stand?
Well, unfortunately, it's kind of more of the same old. Every year, there's some reason to think, hey, this is going to be the one where all the Android device makers finally get their acts together and start pushing out these upgrades quickly and making a real effort. There's always some reason. And every year, it kind of ends up, there's a little fluctuation, but by and large, there's just never a great all-around result. So this year, we were looking at Pi, which came out last fall, Android 9. And so the reason we're doing it now is because it's been 6 months since the software's release, which is just kind of a nice standard metric to look at. And, if a company's going to get software out in a reasonable amount of time, but 6 months is a pretty reasonable half a year. If they can't do it in half a year, they're not really putting in much of an effort. Right. So what I do is I measure it, again, just for consistency, looking at the U.S. flagships, whatever phone is available readily in the United States. And you could do any country, of course, and the results would change, but you just need some consistency. So being that we're in the U.S., that's kind of what we've always looked at. And I measure how long it takes each device maker to get the software to their current generation flagship and their previous generation flagship. So that being said, the results are basically Google did great. Everyone else, not so much. OnePlus, which is a pretty small manufacturer, but a significant one, especially when it comes to the Android enthusiast community, they were in second place with a 74% C, if that tells you anything. Now, it is a step up. Last year, they were also in second place with a D, so we've seen some improvement. But after that, every single grade, including, of course, ones by the big-name manufacturers like Samsung, everyone else got an F. Samsung was the highest F this year. A little bit of improvement.
Sort of an F plus, maybe?
Yeah, badge of honor. They came in with a 37% F, basically because Samsung did get the software onto its current generation flagship just shy of 6 months, but it did it right within that 6-month window. Nothing for the previous generation flagship, but it's more than we can say for Samsung last year when it didn't do anything at all within the first 6-month window.
So is the issue here, we've talked about this in the past in terms of why an Android user might want to go with a Google device. Isn't the fast upgrade really the biggest reason you would think in terms of suggesting a Google phone? Is that because of the operating system is so quickly rolled out?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that within, what are now Pixel phones. Google used to not make, but put out the Nexus phones and same kind of deal. They're really the only device where you're going to consistently get that timely and reliable upgrade. Not only that you're going to get it, but it's a guarantee. It's written into part of the device's sale pitch, that is part of the deal. Not only, again, with those big operating system updates, but also the monthly security patches. Other companies will do okay here and there, but no one else consistently does it and makes it a part of their, kind of DNA, that's what they do. I had a footnote. There are a couple of little small companies like Essential, the company that was started by Android's founder, Andy Rubin. Yep. It just has one phone. It didn't even put out a phone last year. It's only put out one phone. There have been a lot of stories about how it's not doing great. It was supposed to put out a phone last year. It didn't. It's definitely not a big player. It's hardly sold any devices. But that being said, it has done well. So there are a few little high points here and there. But when it comes to the major Android manufacturers, certainly, from an American perspective, Google's about the only one that is consistently putting them out. You would hope Google would do well, but you would also hope that some other companies would do, reasonably well in addition to that.
Does this go back to just the fact that the carriers are not as interested in making sure that devices are upgraded because it doesn't really help them in any way, and if anything, it might encourage people to buy a new phone so they can get the latest operating system? Isn't it sort of like working against their own best interests if they were to readily upgrade everybody as soon as they could?
Yeah, I think there's a strong argument to be made. And, we'll probably never know for sure because no one's going to come out and say that. But when you think about it, Google is the only company where software is a core part of its revenue and its business model. Because Google, even if it doesn't make money selling devices, it's benefiting from you being online, having a good experience being online and using Google services, because then of course it can, collect data from you, use that data to position ads. It's going to win no matter what. Whereas Samsung, HTC, LG, whomever, they're making their money by and large from selling you phones. And yeah, if your phone is looking more and more modern and fresh and current every, few months with a nice shiny new update, then it's kind of actively working against their interests. On top of that, they're spending money, a lot of resources to put these upgrades out. And on the surface, at least, they're not making anything directly from that. You can make an argument about that they're building customer loyalty and something like that. But as we've seen, people don't seem to care. The general public doesn't know enough about what's going on here to say, oh, Samsung's not putting out great upgrades at a good pace, so I'm not going to buy it. So it's not hurting them. So until, if and when it ever did, they really have no motivation to make a change.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't remember now which manufacturer it was, but I recently saw something, I think earlier this week. One of the companies was getting kudos for finally rolling out Oreo 18 months after it had arrived. And I'm like, wow, that is a real long time frame, I was stunned at how long it is, because coming from the the Apple side of things, in fact, I did a little research myself to see where Apple is, and based on what Apple is saying, 78% of all devices introduced in the last 4 years are now using iOS 12. So that's the other side of the coin when it comes to like speedy updates. It's a shame that it's only Google that's doing it on the Android side, but that's the comparison. Let me ask you. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's definitely a difference. At the same time, I often like to point out that it is a little bit of an apples to oranges, so to speak, comparison, because the way they handle, or the way they kind of frame operating system upgrades and what is part of the operating system is pretty different from Android to Apple. Google has done this over several years, in large part as a response to the fact that these manufacturers aren't taking these upgrades seriously and doing well. What it's done is broken out a lot of core pieces of the operating system into standalone apps that it then updates. So, in any given month, every single Android device owner will get a ton of upgrades, oftentimes which, if you just list them out, look like they could be an entire iOS update. You might get an update to your stock email app, your Maps app, your browser, and then even some behind the scenes things like Google Play Services, which controls a lot of sort of system level tools and security and privacy features. So there is another side to it. It's not as bad in a complete parallel comparison as it seems. But yeah, certainly when you look at the OS updates themselves, it's a world of difference.
Okay. Are we seeing anything? You've also written pretty extensively about Project Treble, and that was obviously the effort to try to streamline things and make it easier for these Android updates to go out. It doesn't sound like, at least looking at your numbers this year compared to last year, the previous years, that it's had a big impact yet. Are we seeing anything from Project Treble?
Well, that was really what made this report card so fascinating, and that's something that there's a separate analysis that's on computerworld.com now, really looking just at that, because it's a whole other can of worms and a lot more data to pull. But basically what it comes down to is Project Treble was supposed to shave about a quarter of a year off of the upgrade process. That's information that a Treble engineer and an official Google guy who was responsible for the program said to me when we interviewed him at some point last year. So they knew going in it wasn't going to be a magic fix. You're not going to go from taking 8 months for some companies to do an update to have them suddenly doing it in a week or whatever. But taking 3 months out is still pretty significant.
Sure.
So that was sort of the metric we were looking at. And did it shave 3 months off by and large, roughly across the board? And when you look at it, it really just didn't, which is a shame. So we can go down some of the examples. HTC did worse this year. It took them 99. So we're looking at the current generation flagship. It took HTC 99 days with Oreo. We're still waiting for any delivery with Pi. So that's, as of the day we're taping this, about 190 days and counting. So pretty, they're not right on the cusp. We're way past the point.
They've fallen off the cliff. Yeah.
Yeah. And HTC is certainly having its own trouble, so they probably don't have the resources. That being said, we go past there. LG is officially past the point of meeting that 3-month window of improvement. It took Not nothing to be proud about here. 274 days for
Ouch.
LG to get Oreo to its current generation, like its top tier phone, people
Yep.
who just bought it, and to beat that by 3 months with Pi, it would have had to have got the Pi update onto its flagship by February 6th. So we're well past that. It's doing worse.
Okay.
Moto's also past the point. Samsung saw a little bit of improvement, as we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Modest improvement, we'll say. It went from 213 days with Oreo to 177 days with Pi. So still nowhere near the 90-day level that it should have. And then when you start looking at the previous gen flagship, because, most people aren't buying phones every year, especially now. You want to get a phone and know it's going to have updates for at least 2 years at a bare minimum. And Samsung still hasn't sent anything out to its previous generation flagship. The one company that did have that 90-day improvement that did well, OnePlus, it improved its delivery time for its current gen flagship by almost spot on 91 days. So there's our kind of one little shining ray of hope. But then you go to the previous generation flagship and it did 47 days.
I was going to say
worse.
407 days would be not
That'd
so
be
good.
something. Yeah.
That would not be
That'd be
good.
something.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, but still 47 days worse. So OnePlus did a little better on one side, a little worse on the other side. Again, Google, the one consistent company doing about the same year to year. But by and large, the improvement that they were hoping to see just isn't there. And it just comes back to what we were saying a second ago, and something that I've written about since all this treble talk started and even further back. What can you say other than the logical factor that's unaddressed by treble, still present here, is motivation?
Right.
And that's something that no amount of engineering wizardry can address, because you can see the logic in what Google did. It makes sense that you're going to, take a lot of the work out. And what they did is they took all the kind of foundational hardware level elements of the operating system and put them into a separate level so that every time an update comes along, the manufacturers don't have to wait on Qualcomm or whomever to do their part. And so that all makes sense logically, but if the company still just doesn't care and doesn't have motivation to do it, you can't fix that with any amount of coding,
Right. Understood. Okay. So I guess we'll have to kind of wait a little longer and see if maybe Treble can make some progress. The other question that I wanted to get to, and this is sort of the underlying or overlying issue here, is, and you've written about this this week for us on Computer World. Why should people be concerned about updates and upgrades? We sort of know that, but I'd like for you to lay it out, in more detail as to why this is important.
Well, it's a really good question, because when we talk about these new OS upgrades, we tend to talk about more the surface level things like Pi, the gesture controls, and whatever features you're going to see in the interface design changes. And a lot of people think, I don't care so much about that. I like my phone the way it is. Or if you're using like a Samsung or LG phone, each manufacturer kind of modifies the software in their own way, and you may have already had some kind of equivalent of this feature for a while, and so you think, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But the truth is, there are a lot of less sexy, attention-grabbing features, elements of an OS update that often get overlooked. So with Pi, for example, there are a lot of performance, privacy, security type of improvements. With some of the examples with Pi, apps are able to use less memory, be more power efficient, and load faster. There's a lot of changes to the tools that app developers have access to. They can use advanced machine learning, newer Wi-Fi protocol with better indoor location pinpointing. And then in addition to bringing new things, with every release, Google also, I hate to say takes away, but kind of tightens up what people are able to do in the name of ongoing, improvements to privacy and security. So with Pi specifically, there were restrictions put in place onto how and when apps can access your microphone, your camera, sensors when they're in the background. Something they used to be able to do. Now it's a little more restricted. That's something we're expecting to see more of with the upcoming Android Q release. And things like that. There's more effective encryption for Google backup data, enhanced privacy for network connections. The list goes on and on and on. And it's the same every year. We saw similar things with Oreo, which, among other things, brought a whole new system that lets you opt out of individual notifications from an app. So I could say, I don't want to get these alerts from Google Maps asking me to rate a place every time I'm in it. But I still do want to get an alert if there's traffic on my way home, from my commute to work or whatever.
Yep.
Important things that are kind of behind the scenes and under the hood a little bit, sometimes things you might not even overtly notice, but certainly with the privacy and security and the performance, they're pretty important. So people may not always realize, especially when we talk about more casual users, the kind of things that are happening. But it's certainly reasonable to say that they're worth having and things that you should care about.
That's really, really good insight. It dawns on me too that if we're ever going to get to a point where Android users are clamoring, and yelling at the carriers and the hardware makers and everybody that they can responsible for this, that may be the one way. Once these companies feel a little bit of heat, that they might be able to roll these things out. There's nothing stopping them from rolling out these updates in a timely manner. They just don't, as best we can tell. And it just sounds like it's going to be one of these, Project Trouble aside, everything that Google's doing aside, it's going to have to come, from the bottom up, I think.
Yeah, if and when people, care at enough of a volume that someone like Samsung has to listen. Because, okay, if we want to cut anyone a little slack, not to say that there's an excuse, but if you want to justify or try to understand it, a company like HTC, you can see why it's struggling now.
Yeah,
I mean, it makes sense.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
But a company like Samsung, there's no reason Samsung, even before Treble, if Samsung wanted to devote the resources to it, it has the money. It could get upgrades out in a matter of weeks, certainly with Treble, even before if it wanted to. So, yeah, it all just comes down to these companies seeing a reason and people kind of demanding it, which, may or may not happen. I did just see something interesting the other day that Google's Pixel line was now officially the fastest growing smartphone line within the U.S. Obviously still very small scale, but it's
got to
everything
start somewhere.
Has to start somewhere. Right. That's the same conversation we could have had about Android, 8 years ago, that it was small scale, growing really quickly, but still just in these single digits, didn't seem significant. And, who's to say if that'll happen or not with Pixel, but maybe that growth will, at some point, if it continues, encourage other manufacturers to start taking some of these things seriously. Maybe not.
That's an excellent point. I like that. I think you're right. So last question, random question. We got Android Q coming up this year. Do we have any idea what Q is going to be? I'm kind of holding out for quiche, even though I know it's not a sweet, but I can't think of any sweets that are starting with the letter Q.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Quiche is about the only thing that they've always said. They used to say desserts. Then at some point, they just kind of quietly started saying sweet treats to brand it out. Because like Jelly Bean that came out, that wasn't a dessert. Yeah. So maybe they'll come up with some way to.
I like jelly beans for dessert, but okay. I know I think quiche is clearly not a dessert. I don't think.
Yeah, no, Q is a tough one. I mean, the only ones that really make sense are these non-American, impossible for people like us to pronounce kind of desserts that you would never have heard of, which would be kind of cool if they went with something just totally out there that most of us didn't know how to say. It'd be a nice learning experience.
There you go.
But yeah, we'll see.
All right, great. Okay, on that note then, thanks for the insights on the upgrade report card, which is on Computer World. You can take a look at it now. Again, it's a very extensive look at all the carriers and the manufacturers and what Google's doing with grades and everything. It's well worth your time. JR, thanks so much for the insights and the information. We'll revisit all of this at some point down the road, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, buddy. For now, that's a wrap.